So the question is, why this discussion now? Taking as a fact, I guess that artificial intelligence is definitely a revolution in life sciences. We must admit that it raises tough questions. How can we ensure AI tools are trustworthy, fair, and transparent for patients? How do we balance innovation and regulation, especially when the EU and US are taking different approaches? And what will mean AI for biotech business models, investments, and issues like data privacy, intellectual property, and cloud infrastructure? So, to kick off, I would like to start with you, Professor. As you know, the new EU GPAI, General Purpose AI Code of Practice, which took effect about a month ago, emphasizes transparency and safety for general purpose models. Which of these principles are most critical for public trust in healthcare AI? And do you see ethical risks if they remain voluntary than binding?
All right, well, thank you for the question. I think both transparency and safety are important. If I have to pick one, because that's the only option, I would put more emphasis on safety, personally. But I'm not necessarily saying that transparency doesn't matter, but why I would prioritize safety, because if we're thinking of the clinical setting, for example, one thing that we've been always discussing is closer to transparency, the idea of how much the performance, the accuracy of what an AI system is doing matters versus how much the explainability of the system matters, right? So, and in our field, at least in health and medicine, we have an open debate about this, and it seems that we're thinking that if we were to establish safety, we could probably be a little bit more relaxed about some of the explainability or some of the transparency. But that goes to your question, safety first, transparency probably second. In an ideal world, we would have both. I think what the code is trying to do is to encourage those who are working with these technologies to try to achieve both. Now, if we're thinking about voluntary versus mandatory, I think the spirit of the code is voluntary. And we saw many companies who signed on to this, making the commitment. I think part of it is an aspiration. We think that's good. I'm a fan of a combination of voluntary and mandatory schemes. I don't think it's only one way we can achieve things. Now, one risk of voluntary commitment to these things is that some people don't have to do them, and so you can say, well, maybe those systems are not going to be safe, they're maybe not going to be transparent. But I think there we do have other ways in which we could get to that. One problem with making such codes mandatory could be, and we've been discussing that in Europe, for small and medium-sized companies or startups where sometimes they don't have what it takes to make sure that they go through all these compliance mechanisms. So you could say there's an ethical risk there because it will be difficult for these kinds of organizations to move forward. Maybe I stop here and we can return to these kinds of questions.
Thank you. I guess it's on a voluntary basis for the moment until further standards will get adopted. But okay, thank you again. Turning to you, Christos, fairness, explainability, and transparency are not being met by many AI technologies. With the AI Act's high-risk obligations and the new GPAI transparency templates, what are the most significant bottlenecks you face in building compliant health AI systems for the EU?
Let me first make a more kind of generic comment, right? You guys can hear me, I'm assuming. And that is on the policy making. Policymakers, I think they have no idea how systems work. And as a result, and maybe you guys believe otherwise, but given my experience over the last 30 years building companies and ideas, policymakers have zero knowledge, and actually zero knowledge of how AI works right now, and whether things can be transparent. Actually, do you guys believe AI is transparent today? No. Okay. Good. Because it's not transparent. Okay. So because it's not transparent, and do you guys believe it's going to be explainable? No, because it's not actually, and it's not going to be, because the underlying technology is probabilistic to the extent that you cannot enforce it to be explainable. So policymakers basically came up with this code that is not going to work. So even voluntary. So it's going to be a check mark that I somehow have to say I'm compliant, which is how typically things happen in the industry. Okay, but like what we're facing, what I'm facing. Number one is chain of custody. I have no idea if I go and consume a public model, a frontier model, when the data is coming from, how it has been basically trained, how it has been aligned. The tens of thousands of labelers that go and and just change the weights, adjust things, and do things. So that's number one thing. Number two, which is actually a very big problem, is do you guys know what it takes to manage a compliance program within an organization to be ISO, SOC compliant, HIPAA compliant, GDPR compliant, CPRA, CCPA, and now the new basically EU Act. And by the way, because I'm going to be selling, let's say, to the US, and by the way, I'm going to be competing with China, which is El Dorado. Okay? So now tell me, right? So it's definitely not a level field. So number two is building a team. There's no way for you to just be able to even support that, right? And then everything else, I think, is secondary. I think I heard a lot about IP and technology kind of protection in this conference. I think most of the people have no idea what IP means, really. Okay, so there's no IP. I mean, for me, if you ask me, yeah, let's build patents, fine. It's good for you guys, for the lawyers. But that's about it, okay? You litigate, you do a cross-selling agreement, and that's it. There's nothing more than that. So I'm fairly pessimistic in terms of like what's happening with that code, by the way, because I think not only in the EU, but also in the US, there's no way for people to understand, the policymakers, how things work.
So, George, one of my favorite subject matters is the revised Product Liability Directive, published in late 2024, to address new technologies by expanding the definition of a product to include software, AI system, and basically extend it to the whole supply chain, from manufacturer up to the end user. So now, from the industry perspective again, we discussed yesterday that in the US, investors are accustomed to a different liability environment, often lighter touch than Europe's. With this new EU revised, basically, Product Liability Directive, making it easier to bring claims against AI systems, how do you assess the impact of this regime on backing biotech AI startups compared with the US?
Okay, so I looked it up actually, and it was I think published in 2022, there are certain. Actually, this is for later, so this is for a later question. But for what I saw was that the two important changes was the no-fault liability. What the no-fault liability means is that, and the difference with the US, is that the product has to have a fault, but in the US, you have the consumer who does the lawsuit has to prove that the manufacturer knew the fault and was negligent in correcting. In the EU, there is no negligence justification. So that immediately means that, from my perspective, I don't know any product or service that doesn't have flaws. So that means immediately that for sure I can be sued. Now, the second thing that is there, the second big difference, is that they adopted one of the bad things of the US legislation, one of the things that companies have been always complaining about, which is they expanded the scope of damages to include psychological, emotional damage, data loss, and data corruption. That means if I sell, for example, a service to a company, and I lose the data, I lose their data, or there is a corruption in their data, I have to indemnify them for any losses, business losses that they may have. And those amounts can be much, much bigger than what I sell my service for. Now, I haven't seen any lawsuits that have gone forward based on these new laws. So some things may be determined when there is a lawsuit. But I can tell you from the perspective of a US entrepreneur who wants to invest in a company in the US or in Europe, how I would look at it, and how I would advise the companies that I invest whether they should actually open in the US or open in Europe. I would tell them that if they open in Europe, then they would have to have a much longer QA testing cycle, because to make sure that they have as few flaws as possible to minimize the risk of essentially a lawsuit, and cannot take it away completely. That would mean that it would take much longer to bring my product to the consumer. And it will also mean that it will bring, any version, any subsequent version. As we know, you need to cycle very quickly through the changes. Any subsequent version has to have these long testing cycles. So that essentially slows down the process. That means that the cowboys in the US will surpass me, even if I have started first. Now, if I'm a company, if I'm a small company, nobody's really going to sue me. What they're going to do in the lawsuit is they're going to sue me and, the hospital that uses the hospital system, or the business that uses my software, because, I have an AI service that is actually used by somebody to offer the service to the consumer. I'm always indirect, okay? And that means that now that hospital has a much more difficult, environment to, they will pass me through so many more tests in order for them to adopt me. That means, essentially, think about it. US companies usually adopt software from US suppliers. And European companies, European software suppliers, usually hope to sell locally first, before they actually go to the US to sell, right? So now the European software companies are at a disadvantage to the US or Chinese companies. Okay, because essentially their local market is very slow in adopting their software. The American software will actually advance and it will supplant them. That's how I see it.
Okay. Thank you, George. It has been, actually it was under public consultation, the directive, as of 2022, but finally adopted and published late 2024. I agree, but I'm not sure, but I'm a lawyer, sorry, that the long testing periods you suggested, I'm not sure that if they could cure basically any problem, because we're talking about updates, we're talking about extra features. How can a manufacturer, for example, and basically not only a manufacturer, but the whole supply chain, be sure that in 10 years' time, this software will remain,
It cannot. And we are talking also about probabilistic software that is changing with every question that is posed to it, that is continuously learning with new data every day. It's not under my control almost. So,
sure.
Essentially,
No, it's... That's why I said before that it's one of my favorite subjects, because it's a little bit and legally complicated, because there is this reverse, as we say, burden of proof. That means that unless you prove that you were not wrong, basically, then...
That I was not negligent.
Yeah.
So, that I was not negligent. So, essentially...
something like that.
Let's say that somebody gets a wrong answer. Let's say that a doctor gets a wrong answer, does something, kills a patient. Sues my software because they say, well, I got this answer from this software. Okay? Then if I correct the software, then I'm not negligent.
Okay.
Okay? If I don't correct the software and the second patient dies, then I am negligent. That's the difference between US and Europe.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So,
Let me give you an example, by the way, on the same topic. So it just so happened that I built something for a company that was selling cancer drugs, and my software was answering questions to the patients that had basic cancer, and they could actually go and ask a question about adverse effects, saying, oh, I have this problem, I'm vomiting, blah, 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 with this medicine, what should I do? And this thing responds back exactly what you have to do. And let's say this guy dies. So initially we did basically a trial, very well-known company in the US, and they said, well, software is like 90% right, 10% wrong. We cannot do that. FDA is in the mix. So then we basically changed the software, we changed the models, everything, we went like 95%. Same problem. Saying 5%, we cannot afford it. At the end, what we implemented to these guys was a full rule-based system, which is exactly deterministic, 100% correct, and we had like 5 people working on it.
But then it misses the whole point.
Yeah, misses the whole point. So I'm saying let's just be aware that today, Gen AI, if we're talking about AI under the Gen AI umbrella, which is going to change, by the way, at some point, it is fully probabilistic, black box. You have no idea what's happening behind the scenes.
But that's interesting also, just to maybe, if we can interject, because it seems almost a form of exceptionalism. We want to get that 100%. We do not have 100%. We don't have 100% on other things. I mean, you can give drugs to people, and some people may have severe adverse events. They may die from getting a drug, right? But okay, the system we have in pharmaceuticals, of course, it's set up in a way that we know clearly whom we're going to sue and why. But here, it's the way we're going. I think it sort of undermines the purpose of what that technology was going to do. I have to agree with that. And then my ethical questions there is, my ethical question, if you want, because the lawyers will sort this out. And I think at the end, that's how things are going to be said. The lawyers will be settling this. But the question is, if we are not using that technology, are we actually benefiting our society, or are we benefiting our patients? Yes, like in everything, there's going to be the margin of error. And we have to accept what that is.
Some people will die.
Yes, it's not nice to say. It's not a nice thing to say. But the question is, do we have to be doing this seeking perfection compared to all the other things that we're doing where we cannot?
And that is why, as I said, the law is the law, but it's really, we want to see some of the cases and how they will be adjudicated so that, we will adjust our behavior at that time. So the lawyers will be busy.
Yes.
Good. So, Nikos, let's bring in the policy perspective and some, good news, I guess. So, the upcoming EU life sciences strategy aims to boost Europe's roles in health, biotech and research with initiatives like multi-country clinical trials, ATMP centers, and life sciences data assembly. How will this basic broader framework shape AI-powered healthcare and help Europe stay competitive while protecting patient trust?
Thank you. I'll answer that. I have to answer the things I heard first, if that's okay. I heard many interesting things. So, no, I'm not an AI, I'm not a tech guy, but I used to do mathematics, and I always liked the 0-1 cases. Okay. 0, we regulate nothing. Trump. 1, we regulate everything. Maybe maximum Europe. Somewhere in between is the truth. Because if you want what I call Rambo capitalism, EPA we get rid of. Do we want EPA to regulate water? Do we want to have more coal factories? That would be no regulation. Okay, that's rampant. And that's maybe a little bit China model, though they're changing. It's the El Dorado. And the same for drugs with molecules that they can use monkeys and dogs we can no longer use for clinical trials, right? Because we're caring about monkeys and dogs as sentient beings. So that's one point. The sort of our joke a little bit in Europe is America lets the market grow, then regulates it. Europe tries to predict the market and regulates it before it's grown, and maybe it doesn't grow. So, but those are extremes. Now, on the AI, I can't help but the ethical issue. Maybe you can answer that. A specific case which I think about. There was a boy that died from advice from AI. Who's liable? Let's say that company isn't liable. Should we then start to improve that? Europe would say, let's find a way that children don't die from AI. Maybe the thing is to let it keep going, more testing, more people die, a fantastic AI in 5 years, AGI, because we'll have more deaths. The Europe would say, let's try and minimize those deaths, even though the growth of AI will be slower. So it's a more humane thing, and humane means slower. I can say why it's good things later. We don't have to talk about that right now. So the life science that Europe has launched is generally a dream of how the future should be in health. And that includes the European data space, very important for AI, extremely important. And there we have the issues of GDPR, which Europe is tougher on, and the United States and China, of course, are, I think they might be using all of Alibaba information to know exactly what the health situation is. In the United States, as a friend said, you can buy the Fitbit watch and be a company, and then you get all the data of all the people, which in Europe would be hard to do. So it's a little bit slower. So the life science is the dream of how we should introduce all these things into all sectors. And because the main thing in Europe is the problem of money, we have something which now, and because I agree there's a problem with the policymakers, and it's a funny situation that we regulate people, we don't know what their work is, not just AI, in general. It's a funny thing what with parliaments do, not just Europe and Congress everywhere. Congress in the United States is unable to pass almost any laws. So it's a phenomenon that goes, except for dictatorships, around the world. It's the way the democracy works. However, we have a Biotech Act coming up, which has to do with supporting biotech and manufacturing practices and sharing of AI. And until end of November, there's a public consultation. And that's where the companies and the stakeholders come in and can make their criticisms. And hopefully then the commission, which is how it works in Europe, I've been there 3 years, takes those to heart, σαν διαβούλευση, as we say in Greek, διαβούλευση, to improve on the situation. So the question is, do we need some laws? That's the question that Mr. Tryfonas would say. Probably. Is it too extreme? Probably. Will Europe remain behind? Probably. Is it more humane in Europe? Probably. So we have goods and bads. That's a brief response. The life science is our general dream, and within that we have also something called Competitiveness Fund, which would be money for pharma, and we have other. Horizon will still stay. Anybody knows about Horizon? It'll be a funding project for that. We also have an effort for cross-country clinical trials, which is difficult bureaucratically, and their AI could help us to get around all the different rules, because a patient in Sweden is different than a patient in Greece in terms of what we know about him or her. And I would say one more thing about the patents. Maybe in AI not so good, but pharma needs patents. Otherwise they won't invest. They just take the pharma example. The United States lives off patents. For 17 years, the patent protects their drug that they invested $2 billion, and hopefully they come so it's a way of getting innovation, the patent. So it's not just for lawyers. I know you made a little bit of a joke, but it's more than that. And the patents are being discussed in Europe. And the other thing we're trying to do is speed up. Greece has a problem. We don't, for two reasons. One is we have something called the clawback. We can talk about that. But also we're very slow on introducing new drugs because we have a different system. So we're trying to make a platform so when a clinical trial is done in 2 countries, it goes to all of Europe. So it's accepted through all of Europe. We have the EMA, European Medical Agency, versus the FDA. I'm getting away from AI, but in the end, AI is going to help this process of the platform. Anyway, that's a brief sort of answer to some of the things. I think you could help on the ethics of someone. Maybe, of course, the benefits of AI are huge, and also, in my little story, it's robot, if I can say, it's man versus robot, 0-1. 0 man, 1 robot. Can I add one more thing before we finish? So the way I look at this game between AI is, we are born with something we didn't know until recently. We used to be born with our gender, male, female, that's changing, of course, our eye color, short, tall, overweight, or that was we were born. Now we're born with something else we didn't think of, data. We didn't know that we had data around us in the space we walk, and the companies took it free. It's like a gold mine. The top of the gold mine is very easy to get the gold. It takes, as we dig down. So as AI is digging down, it's going to cost more. We're going to be more careful about our data. So in that sense, the only way I think we can improve with AI is using AI. It's a little bit funny. We won't be able to respond to that. And as you say, the probabilistic thing is a very odd way of dealing with it, but that's how it is. How else can AI respond? And we don't know what that is. So as a policymaker in Europe, I'm more on trying to be careful, not the extreme that Mr. Tryfonas is saying, but being careful that we don't stifle the innovation. Thank you.
But okay, so Christos, coming from the US industry and coming back to Nico's point, actually many points, but one of them was IP. So is today's copyright and IP rules well suited for AI training? As a tech executive and founder, how do you manage ownership and liability risk when using unverified models or data sets? And who should own the IP of AI-generated drug discovery outputs?
Nice question, by the way. So, did I send you the question? Maybe. So I think, look, okay, I'll start from the unverified models, right? So, you know, the way you manage risk in this case is by sending the risk or basically getting indemnification from the provider of the model. Basically, that's what you end up doing. So you don't care about, okay, the model is crap or the model is good, how the model is behaving, how it's explainable, documented, I don't care. You know, I'm just going to get it from OpenAI, I'm going to get it from Anthropic. These guys, if I get a lawsuit, they get a lawsuit, they pay. Because that's what happens today, okay? Who has the IP? So now it's a system that you build, and there is a system that, first of all, your system changes. The underlying, like you said, the underlying model changes per day, every day. So what you have today, what you're getting the output today is like different what you're going to be getting tomorrow, right? So, okay, can that be patented? Is there any protection there? Well, look, as a founder, I can tell you I'm going to protect the heck out of it, okay? I will try, I'll make a patent. But it's useless. What am I doing it is because I want to do it for my investors, I want to do it for the market. I'm going to go to litigation and have to be able to kind of prove that I have something to bargain and negotiate, and that's about it. So it's not exactly, you know, it's not kind of, it's a gray zone. You don't know who owns the IP. In fact, there's lots of litigation right now with all the leading frontier model providers, starting from OpenAI. Anthropic basically settled for 1.2 billion last week, or maybe a couple of weeks back or something. 1.5 billion. And this is just the beginning. There is companies in Europe, you guys know Mistral in Paris, they have like so many lawsuits that these guys are going to go bankrupt at some point. And the litigation just started, okay? So we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how we're going to be just navigating that IP protection. It's still very early on right now what's happening. I also agree with you, George, that basically, as a small company, who cares? They don't care about you. They're waiting for you to become bigger. And the minute you become bigger, you get the lawsuits. In fact, the minute you sell a company, there are people out of the woodwork coming against you. Oh, you know, you owe this, you did this IP, I have this or this name, and you have to basically pay. At the time of acquisition, this is like very common. So in general, you use your basically chain of custody and kind of companies that have frontier models, have these guys basically pay, so have them identify you, so pretty much go and have an agreement with them. And then don't worry about IP for right now, because nobody knows. Lawyers are going to tell you, we don't know, they don't know. Obviously, they're going to tell you like slowly, because they charge by the minute, but they don't know. I don't think they know what's happening. We're going to see it in front of like litigation, in front of judges, how they're going to basically make a call. We don't know yet.
It's a little bit heretic, no? It's so there's no need for software patents, I guess.
No, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
I'm saying you still do it for a different reason, but like,
yeah.
like
But
literally, but like, I don't think people believe, like they understand the value of a patent. So it's a different thing, a software patent, than a pharma patent, by the way. It might be something different, okay? Yeah, I just want to make sure that, because it's a different thing. But like we heard before, oh, I'm at a university and I want to spin off something, and you know, the university is going to give some transfer office, they're going to grant me something to be able to build my company. No, I'm not going to do that. I would just go out, do delta chains of my idea and build it. Because the university doesn't understand that fundamentally money are going to go back to them if I'm super successful, because I'm going to donate back to the university. How do you guys think that Harvard and MIT and all these kind of universities make their money in Stanford? There's tons of money coming from entrepreneurs that were very successful and just basically give money back to the university. I mean, if I wait okay, if I wait for the university to give me, or whoever other thing, right, to give me the IP and go and negotiate with VCs and funding and so on and so forth, I'm going to become 100 years old. Okay?
Okay. We don't want you to become 100 years old. So,
I'm becoming.
okay. Coming back to you, George. So, beginning of September this year, President Trump met with tech leaders at the White House to power US AI dominance. Meta announced that it's going to invest at least $600 billion US dollars through actually until 2028 in the AI in the US. So in the opposite role, the EU is investing $200 billion in AI Continent Action Plan with sovereign cloud and supercomputing AI factories, which is a huge public investment. From your US perspective, do you see that this is a kind of, this kind of state-led infrastructure is a genuine magnet for international investment compared with the US and Asia?
Okay, so 200 billion sounds like a big number, but as you say, Meta committed 600 billion, Apple committed 500 billion, Oracle committed 500 billion. The venture company, the Japanese guy, I forget now, SoftBank, committed another 500 billion. And I don't know, I don't remember what Microsoft committed, but I'm sure it's in the billions because OpenAI is basically, now they're creating Stargate, which is going to be the biggest infrastructure for OpenAI. So to give you a perspective, I just saw the announcement actually of Jupiter, which is the, so what I want to say is the following. Also, just VCs in general in Silicon Valley, in 2022, they invested in 1 year, they invested 160 billion. Right now, there is about 580 billion around the world, apart from all the money that I talked about, in VC funds commitments, in VC fund commitments that they haven't actually found a home, haven't found an investment. So what I want to say is that there are several things that need to be done, and money is probably the easiest problem to solve. Okay, so let's go to the next problem. The next problem is basically people. Everybody will say people is very important. And in the same meeting that you're talking about, President Trump also created the Genius visa, which always existed in some form, but I guess it was more difficult. And why did they create the Genius visa? So that they can actually drain all the good brains from everywhere in the world by giving them high salaries. Right now, an AI engineer, the sign-on bonus to sign is $1 billion. The salary is at least $1 million. It's not, it's not uncommon to have a $10 million or $100 million bonus. So I don't think that Europe can compete with these numbers because of the general attitude towards big salaries and, of course, because of taxation. So that's another problem. But let's say that there's going to be still Europeans who just don't want to, live in the Wild West, and they want to, stay in Europe and help Europe, and they're very patriotic. So that's not the most difficult problem yet. Okay? So there is a third difficult problem, is the infrastructure, building the infrastructure. And why is that a big problem? First of all, Europe is slow. Jupiter was just announced as the fourth biggest supercomputer made in Europe, the #1 in Europe. Actually, it's not the fourth. I don't think it's even close, because they didn't mention any of the ones I know that are much, much bigger than the ones that they mentioned. It has 24,000 GPUs. And now the Colossus XAI's system did had started with 100,000 GPUs, and Elon Musk did it in 122 days. You know when Jupiter started? In 2018. It took 7 years. And Elon Musk, in another 45 days, he added another 50,000 GPUs. And by the Colossus is 1/4 of the size of OpenAI's system, and OpenAI is designing the next system, Stargate, which is going to be 4 times larger. Okay, and what is the problem that Europe has? Okay, the problem that Europe has is that it doesn't have power. Because of all the mandates for clean power, they don't have the power to actually power these data centers, which are extremely, power hungry. Okay, so it has to solve the power problem. But let's say that they solved this as well. Okay, and now they say, okay, now we can compete with the US. Guess what? They don't have chipsets. And what is the US going to do? If Europe wants to compete with the US, Europe will just do the same thing it did with China. It will restrict the chipsets availability. So there is no way that Europe can actually become competitive with the US. And this is a game where winner takes all. And there may be one number 2 and number 3. There's not going to be number 1, number 2. I don't think there's going to be a number 3. Just like a search engine, how many search engines do exist? Because essentially you have the network effects where the biggest AI gets more funded, gets better, gets and the number 2, okay, it will survive because it's in China. There's not going to be a number 3. So that's basically it. Now, let's say that you can even solve all these 4 problems, okay? There's a 5th problem that you're not going to solve. I didn't talk about that. And that's the ecosystem, what we call the ecosystem. The problem with Europe is everybody wants to create and have this infrastructure in their city, in their country. So which country will actually have this data center or this group of engineers? Which one is going to become the city which will have all the AI engineers? All the AI engineers right now, if you notice, are in Silicon Valley. Okay? And it's very important because you can find anything you want, basically, there. And the same thing happens. You have to have hubs. And Europe, every country in Europe, even Greece, wants to be the hub. It's impossible. So I know miracles can happen, but this is going to be, one heck of a miracle to pull this off. So I would say it's not a problem because the US is not against Europe. The US doesn't feel that Europe is a competition for it. The US looks at China as the competition and doesn't want to be bested by China. The US is actually very friendly to Europe, and it even opens data centers with AI factories in Europe. So what Europe should do is, instead of actually trying to create its own AI companies and AI platforms and factories, it should essentially focus on creating the applications that run on these factories, because these are platforms, just like compute clouds. That's basically it.
Okay, I think we focus on different, actually, human rights. Okay, Professor Vayena, coming back to you. The EU Commission copyright study issued in July 2025 suggests replacing the current opt-out with an opt-in system for training data. Ethically, should patients and creators have to actively consent before their data fuels medical AI? Or does this risk halting research progress? Last night at the Balthazar, we discussed that, and you mentioned that some very recent news you have about the Swiss Parliament and the opt-in. Would you like to share them with us?
Yes, we did share a few thoughts in the Balthazar, not under the influence, I may say. It was a very sober conversation. But so I think there's a distinction to be made in this question. First, when we're talking about patients and their data that can be accessed, and when we're thinking about copyright of content, because, and that's not a legal distinction only, I mean, legally, of course, you all know that distinction, but I think we've been treating patient data before the AI times when we're doing other kinds of assessments and calculations with a number of protections for very good reasons. We've also progressed to say that we can have different types of consent for using the data, so not explicit consent every time we're using data, but depending on how, whether they are coded, anonymized, or whatever, we can actually have more liberties in using those data. So we've made quite a lot of progress, and I think GDPR includes there various provisions for how we can actually access patient data more easily. So we have to park that for a moment. If we're using data to train systems, again, it really depends on what we're meaning by this data. It's individual patient data, it's anonymized data, it's statistical. What is exactly? And I don't think we can apply the same rule to all these different categories. When it comes to copyright of content, which I think has been a huge discussion, as you mentioned, I mentioned last night, we had exactly that conversation in Switzerland, because creators of content, that was not in the biomedical context, it was actually journalists and other creative actors, they pushed for a legislative motion in the parliament to move, as Europe also suggests, from opt-out to opt-in. We discussed this vividly in Switzerland, and we stopped that motion. We have not come up yet with the solution to this problem, but what we're not going to do is the opt-in. We're going to find some other way, hopefully, and hopefully it's not going to take 5 years to do that. In Switzerland also we deliberate a lot, and then eventually we will reach some consensus. But the reason and the arguments, and I have to say we represented the research, I actually was part of the conversation representing the research community, which put forward the challenge that an opt-in will cause for researchers. Although we have exemptions, the question would be, how are we going to move products out in innovation, in spin-offs, etc., if we have those opt-in systems? So the Swiss proposal so far has been, can we actually look for enforcing existing tools which are not enforced right now, the ways we're using robot text and other systems, that you can bypass them, the enforcement is loose. Can we focus on enforcement, and can we focus on other types of business models that will allow at the same time the kind of easiness that opt-out offers without and also protection of the material that has to be protected. So it's not resolved, but at least from our conversations in Switzerland, we think the opt-in is not going to be the solution that facilitates process, innovation, and might even harm the very own people, the very own entities that actually go for it. If you are a small digital medium, let's say in the journalism, if you are only on digital and you are not print press, you might be actually at a disadvantage with the system than at an advantage. So it might be, at least from our perspective, it might be a somewhat knee-jerk reaction to go into opt-in. We don't know, well, there's the proposal in Europe, we don't know what's going to happen in Europe, but that's how we were trying to do. I want to come back very quickly to, because you said maybe I can help out with the ethics. The thing is, I also agree that we don't have to go to the extremes. We're going to either regulate everything, or we're going to be just loose and have the wild west, east, whatever you want to call it. The question though is, are we approaching this in Europe with that mindset, or are we commitment in Europe to protect human rights, to not let people down, to create that environment of trust? Are we leaning more and more towards the more regulation than a lot of other pieces that maybe we need to put in place? You mentioned ecosystem before. I mean, we can't create ecosystem just with regulation. We need more in order to create ecosystem. So that's the question. I've been thinking, as you were speaking, the analogy of speed limits. In Germany, in highways, there are no speed limits. I live in Switzerland. We have speed limits and cameras every 5 meters. In Greece, we have speed limits. If you take that measure alone, it doesn't help if you look at who's getting killed, how many people are getting killed, and how many traffic accidents we have. It's more than just that one law. That better than me. So what I'm thinking is, when we're coming to this environment of technology and AI, are we taking that approach more holistically, or we're going down and say, okay, let's regulate that kind of quick and easy in some way, not quick, but maybe we have more clarity in that sense. And is this the thing that's going to take us, going to move us forward, not in order to compete, but at least be able to create a more vibrant economy within the safety nets that we want to have, and with respect to human rights? This is where I'm also concerned. From the Swiss point of view, we have medtech that says they're going to go develop in Switzerland, but they're going to go first for FDA approval. They're not going to even stay in Switzerland. And Europe is next. I mean, the biggest market for Swiss medtech is Europe. We're neighbors. We've got to work with them. There is a tendency to move to the US, which is not what we want to achieve.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, point one that I keep, that we are waiting for some innovative approach from our Swiss friends. Second, as you mentioned, and I have to admit that during the last 30 years, I've been working for the healthcare sector. I've never seen more legislation for life sciences than in the last 5 years. And going back to your point, dear Nikos, looking ahead to the EU Biotech Act you mentioned, I think that apparently there are some promises there for deregulation, right? So would you like to tell us more about this?
Yeah, the discussion in the last 2 years is that, maybe it's been for a long time, is that Europe is too regulated. So the Biotech Act has a lot of simplification, more simple rules, less rules. Someone sent me a picture today. We're passing 5 laws to get rid of 1 law, that we're not doing that. So there's a little bit of a joke. And there is a problem of overregulation. Here's the problem is that everybody seems to know it. Left and right, well, maybe some extremes, okay? But 90% of the people in Parliament and Commission know we're overregulated. But we're not able to get to the American system. But I look at something else. I think 95% of the world know we have an environmental apocalypse in front of us. What are we doing about it? We're building more and more. Well, AI is going to use up a lot of energy. We're building more pipelines, more oil. So the fact that we know we don't have it is not enough. The collective intelligence is less than the individual intelligence, if you can see. The sum of the parts is less than the part. So we see those things. And the Biotech Act, these are small measures, maybe big measures, are an effort to deregulate, to simplify, and include AI and innovation. And maybe you know better, I hope, and maybe you did that in the hospitals. I think the overregulation in the hospital systems, for instance, we have a German doctor who's a parliamentarian, now at his final stage in life. I joined because of overregulation. So in my German hospital, I have to file for the German hospital, file for the German health system, and file for the European health system. And I'm thinking maybe AI can take care of a lot of those simple facts, not just innovative medicine, but daily activities that people do in hospitals. You know better. So my hope is that AI will be very important in this space. So that's basically the comment.
So thank you so much for this thoughtful discussion. I think we have covered a lot of ground, but I would like now to open up the discussion to our audience. So any questions?
Τώρα δούλεψε. Ευχαριστώ. Thank you once more, dear Ioanna and panel members. There's something mentioned, especially to Christos and George. Those of us in software as a service products, that yes, there are decision support tools for the users currently, which especially where there are physicians, clinicians, laboratory directors, etc., that we are in the process of registering them, validating them, and via the MDR process as medical devices in Europe. We see that that gives us an edge both in terms of being ethical, but also scalable the way we are getting positioned. Usually we do it via Switzerland. So I would like your comments of that, both on the ethical, but also industrial perspective.
So the question, is the question whether you should do it or not, or like, or you're going to have an edge? Is that the question? Right. So whether you're going to have an edge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you will have an edge, obviously.
So what you tell us is you found a workaround. Wonderful. That's good for you. But I don't know if that's going to save you from lawsuits if you sell your product to a French hospital, or if it's going to solve the problem for the French hospital. And if the French hospital is afraid that they're going to be sued, then guess what? They will make you go through all the validation process of a European standard. So therefore, you're not immune.
France, by the way, from previous experience in clawbacks and stuff like that, it's out of the market.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Okay, but you don't care because, you know, you have America, which is a huge market, and the reason the Swiss companies go to America is because Americans pay 5 times the price of a drug. So that's where the money is. That's why you go there.
100
times.
Okay?
100 times. Okay, that's why you go there, because we don't have a national healthcare system. Okay, and I wanted to, you know, there is one thing, Nikos, that really bothered me, and I want to put that forward. You said that, you know, there is data all around us, and the companies grab it.
Well, they took our books.
They took your
All the
books. Okay.
Maybe 100 million books for free.
Yes.
Okay, that's the example.
Okay,
They
perfect.
took it.
Okay.
I don't mean the data around.
Right. Right.
Books,
So you were talking about IP. Okay. So you're talking about IP particularly then.
Just information they took. To make
Information, okay. In the case of books, for example, knowledge in books, okay, the case for me is pretty clear, okay, and I'll give you two aspects to that. There is a difference between patents and copyright. Let's not confuse the two. In the case of books, we're talking about copyright, okay. So now, what the machine does is that it consumes a book, it gets the knowledge from the book, it doesn't spit out the exact same thing. So as long as it doesn't spit out the exact same thing, then there is no copyright. It's the same thing as a person reading a book and then based on the knowledge of the book, say something.
One difference. The person reading the book had to buy it.
I agree that the companies have to own the book, have to buy the book, yes. And that is why Anthropic paid the $1.5 billion fine, essentially. I agree. But other than buying the book, they don't have any other legal obligation.
I agree.
Okay. All right.
I agree.
Okay, perfect. Good.
Any other question?
I just wanted to ask, maybe, Mr. Papandreou, this is better fit for you, but I wanted to also see the perspective of the panel. You mentioned that in Europe we try to take more the approach of being more humane. I interpreted that to mean we are more careful in potentially even deaths that might be caused by AI, as the previous example. But I have to ask you, you definitely believe AI has an advantage. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't use a technology that only kills, right? So at the individual level, you might say, if that causes death to me, that's disaster to my family. At the society level, that might be different though. So it might be more humane, my simple mind says, and that's my question, that it might be more humane to actually use a technology that might cause a death to Rika, but as a statistical numbers, the AI actually is a benefit to the society. And I just wanted to just hear any comments or thoughts you might have on that.
I think you mentioned that earlier, that drugs will have some people die from side effects, and we still use it. Even COVID maybe, we don't know. But I would say the difference would be the response in Europe to that and America, the way that we respond. In Europe, they would right away try and figure out to solve it. Maybe a little bit, maybe fewer deaths, let's put it like that, with less development of AI. That would be the difference. America would say, let's have a few more deaths so that we can develop the AI. I'm giving extreme, right? Let's have a few more accidents because then we can figure out what's going wrong. So the European regulators would try and figure out beforehand, and maybe that would stifle innovation, and that's what's happening. That's the good and the bad. Okay, so I say one more thing about Europe. America, since I'm Greek American, you can hear from my accent. With the way that AI is growing, what will be missing, we see that jobs will, I think what will be missing is still the EQ, like human carers, teachers, people who are close to humans, I think, unless we get the robots in 10 years that are very nice. Who's going to take care of all the old people in America or in Europe, where you find a slightly better humane thing? Slower growth, more humane. I could go for a whole argument. So I agree that it stifles innovation when you don't take the risk, and people will die. It sounds awful to say that. We have triage system, and even in the Greek hospital, there has to be triage. If you have an 80-year-old man to try and come to a Greek hospital, he'll go last after the 45 or 30-year-old with the same problem. We do it. We already have odd decisions. It's not done formally, but you know, I've had many people call me, my father's dying, get Nikos, Papandreou, βάλτον στο νοσοκομείο. We don't take them. I understand. So we have those choices in society. Europe is slower because it will put more controls. Hopefully, less children will listen to AI and follow the rule that it's time to kill yourself. I don't know how that happened. I don't think it was DeepSeek or open. It was a little one. It was what? A replica. So anyway, but that's an example how we have to look. I think we have to look at that case, no? Or we just let it happen. I think we look at that. And there are cases of companies that knew there was something wrong, like the Gremlin car, if you remember that car. The company has inside documents. They knew it was dangerous, that if you crashed the bank, it would explode. But they kept it going for 5 more years, and they had to pay a big fine at the end of it. So they had, as you said earlier, they understood. It's not that they figured out, they knew, but it was cheaper. They knew. Yeah. So that's negligence. And you're saying Europe has a different rule. That's very legalistic, and of course, we're always talking about many of those things, not this one in particular, in the health committee. On the main thing we're trying to figure out is how to do good data sharing to make the citizens feel safe, but also get all the benefits from First of all, we don't have the same data for all the hospitals in all the countries. Will we ever have that? That's one of the goals that AI can help, so that we have the same client or patient profile in every country, so that AI can actually come up with new innovative drugs. That's sort of a dream that the health committee I'm on is looking at, and how to do that in a sane way, but also to get the big benefit of AI. And I do agree, AI will come from the States and China are the big ones. We have AI, but we're not going to have the money that the United States has. That's just the truth. And also, Europe, again, one final thing, is 27 countries. It's not a continent. So maybe Germany will do more, maybe France will do more, and Europe, so they always say Europe, China, India. It's not the best equivalent. Why doesn't Europe have an army? I mean, it's 27 countries, and I try and say it's not Europe in the way we think, one continent. Anyway, thank you.
But maybe just quickly, I mean, in Europe, we have a word for it, right? We base all our policies in this precautionary principle. We want to be sure that something is not going to be harmful before we, let people use it. Which the question is, and actually I was looking at the Foresight report, the 2.0, Europe Foresight 2.0, and I searched for precautionary principle to see if it's going to be there in how we're looking at 2040, and I found it. So it means that we're, looking at the future through the precautionary principle, which perhaps we have to reflect, has it served us well? It served us in some ways. I'm not sure if it served us in other ways. And I think we're making a choice, to your question, between, if we want to be a bit blunt, which kind of people are going to be dying, because maybe we'll save the children from the chatbot, but we'll have the other people in the hospital waiting in queue dying because the algorithm hasn't sorted out priorities and didn't triage in the proper way. So the question, I think, will be how can collectively make the decision about those things. So some people will be at disadvantage and some people will be at advantage. How to find that way. I'm still, if I may say something, that precautionary principle worries me a little bit if it's our guide for the future. But I do not want to see, the European approach being, of course, at the other end. I think we're going to still, but we have to sandpaper a little bit the edge of the precautionary principle. It's a bit too edgy at this point.
Thank you so much. I think global AI approach would be maybe a solution, but okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, our wonderful panelists, and thank you all.